it's getting to the time of year when a headlamp or torch gets used far more than over the summer. For the few months around June 21st, one hardly gets used at all, though I still carry a small one just in case, as there's still a few hours of darkness, and sometimes it can be useful for finding things in the tent if it's cloudy outside and dark inside the tent itself. However, we're now in the season where they really are essential. I've had two new ones to test this autumn, so I just thought I'd do a little video discussing what I think of them, and also have a look at the ones that I've been using most for the last few years, which when I got them together turns out there's actually 5 different ones. So I'll go through them and what I see as the advantages and disadvantages of each. Now, what's important with the headlamp, I think, is the medium output it has and the length of time that medium output lasts. Now, promotions for headlamps are very fond of telling you the maximum power, but not pointing out, except in the small print, that the battery life for the maximum power tends to be very short. Alternatively, some of them give you the maximum length of time the battery will last, but don't point out that the light output is so minimal for this length of time that the headlamp is barely usable in a tent, let alone outside. So I find what it's important to look for is, the middle ground. What is the medium output, roughly, of the headlamp, and how long does that last? Now, I've found over the years, using and testing many headlamps, that for most purposes, when walking, something between 200 and 500 lumens, which is a wide range, but anything in that range is adequate for walking. Now, I'm not talking about technical climbing or anything like that, but for walking, hill walking, walking in woods, that is the range I find works best. Anything above 500 lumens can be useful if you want to try and light something in the far distance to see what's there or see what's ahead of you, but not essential at all. So if the headlamp doesn't go above 500 lumens, it's not a worry, in my opinion. And time then becomes, how long does it last at the medium power output? Now, of course, some headlamps have variable power outputs, so it depends how you use it. But overall, I'm going to look at the average output and how long that lasts and what that means in terms of using the light. Now, the two I've had to test, that I've been testing recently, are this torch from LedLenser. Now, mostly I do headlamps. Obviously, headlamps have the advantage it leaves your hands free, but having been walking around locally, night walks in the woods with a torch, I have found that yes, a torch does have some uses. Obviously, if you're using trekking poles or an ice axe, a torch gets in the way and you wouldn't use one. But I have revised my opinion, not having used a torch much for years, through using this one. Now, looking at the specs, for which I have to put on my specs, it's called the P5R, so no fancy name, just letters and numbers. It weighs 100 grams. It has a power output up to 750 lumens, which again, is the one that is pushed as to what it will do. However, much more sensible is the mid-range of 350 lumens, or which will last 1 hour, which is not long, or 100 lumens, which will last 4 hours. So I would tend to use it on the 100 lumens unless I really needed a brighter light. Even so, you only get 4 hours out of the battery. Now, the light is variable. You can vary it from a spot to a flood, but also anywhere in between, which is useful. And you've got 3 levels of brightness. It's a rechargeable battery, but you can substitute a AA battery, which can be useful if it fails. And it has a charging port here in the lamp. So overall, as a small head torch, as a small torch, it's fine. But just remember that on the medium output, you only get 4 hours, which for doing evening walks around here, which are usually 1 to 2 hours, 2 hours at most, it's fine. But obviously on a longer trip, or if you're doing an all-night walk, or you're going out for several days, you need to know that this will need recharging probably at some point. Nearly all of the lamps I'm going to talk about have rechargeable batteries. Some of them can take non-rechargeable batteries as well, which can be useful if you have to swap over and you don't want to try and hold a battery pack plugged into the headlamp while you're using it. However, the battery pack is of course important. I always carry one. I also, at this time of year through until end of April, will always carry 2 lights, because it's much easier to swap from one to another than it is to, have to recharge the headlamp before you can continue using it. Of course, if you can just swap the batteries over and use non-rechargeables, that can be useful. But even then, if it's dark, it's useful to have another light for doing that. The second light I've been testing is a new one from Silva called the Seek 450 Recharge, the 450 being the maximum number of lumens. It's lightweight, 72 grams. At 450 lumens you get 3 hours power, which is not bad for that much power. However, for 200 lumens you get 6 hours, and that's what I would use it on most of the time. Now, it has a slightly unusual design in that rather than nearly all the unit, except for a plastic cradle folding down, just the lamp folds down, leaving the battery in place. Now, that's useful in that it doesn't tend to pull forwards in the way some lamps can do because of the weight when you tilt it forward. However, it clips into place like that, and you have to push on a narrow bit of plastic, easiest done with your thumbnails, to get it to tilt forward. Now, in here, where it's reasonably warm and there's no wind, my hands aren't cold, that's not difficult to do. But I have found outside in the dark, where you have to feel for the notches, and with cold fingers, and especially with gloves on, this is really difficult. So I tend to leave it like that all the time, except when it's being stored at home. It works pretty well, has 3 brightness levels, switches off quite easily. It has a lock like most of them do, so you can prevent it coming on if the button's accidentally pressed. The headband is good, it's wider than many, and it has a sticky substance inside, so it does tend to stay on the head pretty well. Overall, it's a good little headlamp. The battery life is reasonable, the power output is fine. I don't think 450 lumens is the most you're likely to need. 4 trips of more than 2 or 3 nights, or if I'm going to be out all night, I prefer something with a longer battery life, but this is fine. I took it on a recent 3-night trip with Tony Hobbs, used it every evening for a few hours in the tent. The battery lasted okay. I never used it on full brightness because I didn't need to. So overall, it's not an absolute favourite, but it's okay. Now, going on to the ones I've used most recently, which obviously are my favourites, there are 2 that have had most use in recent years. One of them is the unusual Petzl Iko Core, which has this very strange cradle headband, which I find really comfortable. You don't have to have it tight to stop it slipping. It doesn't move. It's very thin. It doesn't get sweaty underneath. This is by far and away my favourite headband if I'm going to be wearing a lamp for any length of time. Now, the lamp light itself, which as you can see is tiny, is really quite simple. It doesn't have lots of different modes. It doesn't have red lights, green lights, blue lights, or whatever. It does have a lock, and it just cycles through different brightnesses, 1, 2, 3, and off, and that's it. But I find that adequate for me. The maximum light is 500 lumens, which again, as I say, I don't need that. It will last 2.5 hours at 500 lumens. However, at 100 lumens it lasts 9 hours, which is much better, and that's what I tend to use it on. So this, as I say, is my favourite. The battery is on the back there. It's rechargeable, but you can use AAA non-rechargeable batteries as well if you need to. Now, the only time I would want something, more than 100 lumens would be difficult terrain, coming down a steep hillside, you're not on a path, or coming through a dense forest, when perhaps having something that goes a bit brighter can be useful. And for that, the lamp I've used most is the Black Diamond Storm 500R, and this is a bit heavier than some of the others. It weighs 102 grams. Oh yes, the core weighs 81 grams, so this is very light. The big thing with this light is it's up to 500 lumens, but it's how long it lasts. At 500 lumens it will last 7 hours. Now, if you remember, the Silva Seek will only last, what was it, 6 hours at 200 lumens. This one, at 250 lumens, which is adequate for most purposes, this will last 19 hours. and having used it a lot in the depths of winter, I can confirm that this really does last very well. You'll notice this one, however, came into contact with a hot stove once and started to melt. Luckily I realised and grabbed it away fast enough, but it is a warning. All of these are plastic. Don't let them touch anything too hot. But overall, I say, this works really well. It's a simple, it tilts like that. The headband could perhaps do with being a bit wider, and it does pull down a little at the front. But the main thing with this lamp is the length of time it lasts at medium and high power. So as I say, in the depth of winter it gets used a great deal. The other one, used for much the same purpose, is another Petzl. This is the Swift RL. Now this has an astonishing 1100 lumens maximum output. Other than seeing what it looked like, which is of course incredibly bright, I don't use that. It's not necessary. At 275 lumens it will last for 7 hours. However, how long it lasts is variable, because the one thing this does is it's got an adaptive light. So when you're shining it close to, say you're looking at a map or something, the light will dim. You lift it and point it in the different distance, the light will brighten. So obviously how long it lasts in any mode depends on usage. But overall, you know, I think 7 hours, 275 lumens is pretty good, and the adaptive light is useful once you get used to it. Though I did find initially it was a bit startling, because suddenly the light would brighten and dim and you hadn't done anything. But overall, I think this is a good lamp. It weighs 104 grams. I mean, the heavier lamps, this one and the Black Diamond 500, have bigger batteries, which is why they last longer, and of course why they weigh more. At the other extreme is the Petzl Bindi, which is tiny and weighs 35 grams, and this is the one I take at the height of summer, when there's really not that much darkness, and I may not use a headlamp from one day to the next, but I like to have one with me. Now this, on 100 lumens, this will last 3 hours, which is not very long, but you know, it's not one for walking on winter nights. It's one that now will go into a box and stay there until May. But it's so light, and because it's so light, the fact that it's simply got a shock cord headband isn't a problem. It's also useful if you don't want to carry a bigger one as a backup, just to carry it as a backup in case something happens to your main light. And then finally we have what is effectively the smaller version of the Storm, which is the Spot R400, and as the name suggests, this has a maximum output of 400 lumens. It weighs 71 grams, so considerably lighter than the other one, and at 200 lumens it'll last 8 hours, and at 400 lumens it'll last 4 hours, which isn't bad. I sometimes take this one out for 1 or 2 night trips in winter when I'm not expecting to do much walking in the dark, and I find again the 200 lumens is fine. Anyway, this is a little look at a collection of headlamps. I have others, these are the ones that get used all the time, and a quick review of 2 that I've just had to test this autumn. The main thing, of course, is to make sure you've got a light with you, whether it's a hand torch or a head torch, and that the batteries are fully charged, that you have spare batteries if it will take them, or a second headlamp. Because the last thing you want at this time of year is to find your walks taken longer than expected, you're coming down, it gets dark, and then your light fails, and you're up there on a mountainside, possibly in a storm, relying on your phone as the only light you've got, which is not very bright and won't last very long itself. So the most important thing, whether it's one of these or one of the many others available, is to have lights with you. Anyway, I hope you found that of interest, and I'll think of something else to talk about fairly soon. Thank you for watching. Now, while I'm looking at a hand torch, here's what I think are the advantages. The disadvantage, of course, being that it's in your hand and not on your head. But the advantages are very much that it's easy to point it anywhere you want. You're not tilting your head up and down or turning sideways, or moving the lamp up and down to see different things. With this, it's easy, and that's the big advantage. And carried like this, I don't really notice the weight. However, I do have one, I suppose, bugbear of mine, which is when you see people using handheld torches in films, on television programs and so on, so often they're holding them like that, and I don't understand why. Perhaps someone can tell me, but having tried it, in case there was an advantage that I had missed, all I find like this is it's less easy to direct the light, and it's more tiring. That's an uncomfortable position to hold your arm and wrist compared with that. And also, having the lamp here means you get better 3D definition with what you're looking at than when it's close to your head. So this, I don't know why it appears so often in dramas and films, but it really seems to me to be a silly way to hold a torch. Anyway, that's just a quirk of mine. Perhaps other people find it works fine like this, but for me it doesn't, and if I'm using a handheld torch, I'll be holding it like this.